But yeah, and we love Buddy, and I think the other reason we love Buddy was that he wrote. He wrote his stuff. Elvis didn't write his stuff.
Paul McCartney just said something about Buddy Holly that will shock you. Rumors have circulated for years regarding the renowned Beatles member's close relationship with the iconic rock and roll star. But McCartney has been silent until this moment. It had been speculated for decades by fans, but McCartney finally confirmed it in a historic interview. Buddy Holly's impact on the Beatles was considerably more significant than anybody had anticipated. The catch is that the extent to which that bond actually extends may surprise you. From the start, was McCartney secretly enamored with Holly's brilliance? Were the Beatles' early hits and their sound fundamentally influenced by Buddy Holly's music? Paul McCartney didn't realize how much rock and roll icon Buddy Holly would influence his sound when he took up a guitar for the first time in the early 1960s. In the early days of rock and roll, the Beatles were no different from any other band attempting to carve out a niche for themselves. But McCartney noticed one artist, Buddy Holly, amidst it all. Holly's reckless approach to songwriting, infectious enthusiasm, and knack for creating unforgettable songs were influences on McCartney and many other young musicians of his day. When it came to McCartney, Holly was more than simply an admiration. He was revolutionary. Over the years, McCartney has spoken frankly about how Holly's songs influenced the way John Lennon and him approached songwriting in interviews. McCartney remembers the exact moment when "That'll Be the Day" sparked an epiphany for him. McCartney's own songwriting technique was profoundly influenced by Holly's knack for combining infectious rock and roll melodies with deeply felt lyrics. Holly's attitude and desire to push the boundaries of the genre were more than simply his music that McCartney admired. As a rock star, Holly was responsible for all aspects of his sound, including songwriting, instrumentation, and production. As they developed into one of the most groundbreaking musical groups of all time, the Beatles' trademark independence became increasingly apparent. As soon as the Beatles formed, Buddy Holly's influence could be heard in their music. The Beatles, who were still discovering their sound, experimented with cover versions of hit rock songs. Buddy Holly was a major influence. One of the standout tracks on their Beatles for Sale album, Words of Love, was actually a rendition of a Holly song that was a staple of their early repertoire. McCartney loved Holly's music for more than merely covering it. She was an inspiration for his own work. They wanted to inject their music with an air of honesty, openness, and originality, not only perform rapid tunes with memorable riffs. Thanks to Holly, McCartney and Lennon were able to dare to pursue a more genuine, original sound, defying the prevailing trends of the period. Even more intriguing is the fact that McCartney's early perspective on songwriting in the Beatles was impacted by his respect for Holly. In his innovative use of musical narrative, Holly was a trailblazer. Not only did he compose songs about love, but also about loss, loneliness, and the difficulties of life. One of the defining characteristics of the Beatles was McCartney's exploration of more introspective and personal lyrics, which he did mostly during the early years of the band. Buddy Holly had an impact on the Beatles' songwriting, but his inventive studio practices were just as influential in shaping the band's recording style. The innovative studio work of the Beatles is often associated with the use of overdubbing, a technique that Buddy Holly was an early proponent of. McCartney, who was ardent about expanding the frontiers of music production, saw Holly's use of the studio to generate novel textures and sounds. It's not surprising that the Beatles, when they began to record their own records, also began to play around with multitracking, resulting in layers of sound that rock music had never heard before. What would later become the groundbreaking method of recording music by the Beatles had its origins in Holly's experiments in the studio. Several aspects of the early Beatles' music may be attributed to Holly's influence. The Beatles were capturing the raw intensity of Holly's music with their own distinctive style, whether it was the tight harmonies in songs like Please Please Me or the use of basic yet powerful guitar riffs. However, Holly was an influence not only on the music, but also on the way the band approached performances. Holly, with his geeky spectacles and boy-next-door appearance, went against the grain of the conventional rock star stereotype of the day. What McCartney loved most about his performances was how honest and unassuming he was. In the process of coming into their own, the Beatles fully embraced their authenticity, transcending their status as a band to become a cultural phenomenon that had a profound impact on society. Paul McCartney's relationship with Buddy Holly persisted even after the Beatles disbanded. Many times throughout the years, McCartney has mentioned Holly as someone who has really impacted his music. When asked about Holly, McCartney said, "He was one of the first rock and rollers to have an impact on me," in an interview from 2007. This recognition goes beyond a casual remark. It serves as a poignant reminder of the significant impact Buddy Holly had on the formative years of Paul McCartney, and how his example would affect the trajectory of rock music. When it came to McCartney, Buddy Holly was more than simply a rock and roll icon. He was an inspiration. McCartney wished he could have Holly's talent for writing classic songs that would always be popular. Even more intriguing is the extent to which this impact extended beyond McCartney's early career. After leaving the Beatles, McCartney kept channeling the enthusiasm and imagination he'd gotten from Buddy Holly into his solo efforts. Some of Holly's most famous songs, such as Maybe I'm Amazed and Band on the Run, reflect her adventurous, introspective, and fearless personality. In paying tribute to Buddy Holly, one of rock's most influential pioneers, McCartney shows how closely their creative trajectories were and how much of an impact Holly had on his music. It is clear from McCartney's admission of this long-standing effect that Buddy Holly had a major influence on the early sound of the Beatles and on McCartney's approach to music in general. Buddy Holly's impact is undeniably a part of Paul McCartney's musical identity as he keeps performing and releasing new music. What other obscure inspirations from McCartney's early years have molded the famous Beatles music that we know and love today, now that he has acknowledged the profound impact Buddy Holly had on the Beatles' sound? A decade after the Beatles had changed the face of music, Paul McCartney took a risk in 1971 that solidified his feelings of adoration and respect for Buddy Holly. It was about making sure that Holly's music would be there for a long time, not just for his fans, but for generations to come. The publishing rights to Buddy Holly's song catalog were acquired by McCartney's company, MPL Communications. The catalog included timeless classics such as That'll Be the Day, Peggy Sue, and True Love Ways. McCartney's decision to purchase the rights wasn't merely a business venture. It was a personal tribute to the musician who had tremendously inspired him. Considering how much of an impact Holly had on McCartney from the beginning of the Beatles, it was only fitting that they acquire Holly's library to make sure his music would be loved by people for years to come. Sadly, Holly passed away in an airplane crash when he was just 22 years old. McCartney felt that his legacy was underappreciated in the years after his death. "I wanted to make sure that Holly's songs would continue to inspire future generations because I thought her rock and roll contribution deserved to be preserved," according to McCartney. For McCartney personally, as well as for the music industry as a whole, this purchase was monumental. Music that touched him profoundly had always had a special place in his heart, and Holly's songs were no different. McCartney frequently reminisced about how, as a young guy, he would be captivated by Holly's song and the simple beauty and raw passion it contained. Heartfelt expressions of love, grief, and desire, songs like That'll Be the Day weren't only catchy. Owning these songs was like inviting Holly's brilliance into McCartney's life on a more personal level. They were the type of music that McCartney wanted to compose. A shrewd commercial move, the purchase of Buddy Holly's library was also an homage to McCartney's musical hero. Buying the rights to popular songs for cheap was possible, since music publishing was an underappreciated asset back then. McCartney made a brilliant move by purchasing Holly's catalog for a small fraction of its true value. Financially and emotionally, McCartney would reap the benefits of purchasing Buddy Holly's repertoire, as his music would continue to bring in substantial income over the years. In and of itself, the agreement was revolutionary, since it included the acquisition of Holly's compositions from the estate of Norman Petty, who had been her manager and producer. After Holly's death, Petty's commercial connections with her songs caused controversy, despite the fact that he had been an important role in Holly's early career. For a long time, Petty and Holly's wife, Maria Elena Holly, had ownership of his music rights. However, by the early 1970s, Holly's family and fans were becoming increasingly concerned that his work was not being given the attention it deserved. It was thanks in large part to McCartney's decision to buy the collection from Petty and his business associates that Buddy Holly's songs finally got the respect it deserved. A very personal gesture was McCartney's buying of Holly's discography. It served as a memorial to a musician who had died at an early age, and as a means for him to hold on to the music that had influenced his own style. McCartney felt that it was important to preserve Holly's music for cultural and economic reasons due to the profound impact of his brief but impactful career. There was a growing sentiment in the music business for the 50s, and Holly's songs were considered as the quintessential soundtrack to that time. The acquisition of the rights by McCartney guaranteed that Holly's legacy would remain prominent in the public mind. Furthermore, McCartney's acquisition of Holly's library represented his growing responsibility as a guardian of rock and roll heritage. As McCartney embarked on his solo career after the Beatles broke up, he started to view himself as a guardian of the musical heritage of earlier generations as much as an artist. The catalogs of other notable musicians, such as the Beach Boys and the Everly Brothers, were later acquired by McCartney in the years that followed. The most significant and meaningful thing, though, was getting Buddy Holly's catalog. Buddy Holly was a rock and roll pioneer, and McCartney's choice to purchase his collection was a reflection of his appreciation and respect for the artist. With the Beatles, McCartney had become something of a trailblazer in his own right, and he considered Holly as a pivotal figure in the evolution of popular music because of the way she could combine pop melodies with the new rock and roll sounds. Additionally, McCartney acknowledged that Holly's songs had become an indelible component of rock music due to the innumerable musicians who had covered them. As McCartney viewed it, acquiring those tunes was his way of preserving rock and roll history and ensuring that it would go on. A number of years down the road, McCartney would consider buying Holly's collection to be among his life's most rewarding purchases. He wasn't in it for the money or the fame. He wanted to ensure that Buddy Holly's music will be around for years to come. McCartney would later claim that Holly's songs were classics because they would never go out of style. By purchasing the rights to them, he made sure that they would be heard, loved, and revered for years to come. The bond between McCartney and Buddy Holly is stronger now than it was when they were younger. With each interview and live performance, McCartney has reiterated his utmost respect for the rock and roll icon. Whether it's in the arrangement of his songs or his use of melodies to convey feelings, Holly's impact is audible in McCartney's work. More than merely a commercial move, McCartney's acquisition of Buddy Holly's song library was a lasting homage to a musical legend who had an indelible impact on the trajectory of his career. Why, though, did McCartney think it was crucial to keep Buddy Holly's name alive long after the Beatles had left their imprint on the world? Was there more at play than a simple appreciation for a legendary rock star? By daring to play in Buddy Holly's hometown of Lubbock, Texas in 2014, Paul McCartney elevated his respect for Holly to a whole new level. Despite McCartney's previous public and musical tributes to Holly, This performance was a monumental and symbolic act that revealed the extent to which Holly had impacted McCartney's life and work. Lubbock was more than a mere performance for McCartney. It was an intimate memorial to the guy who had inadvertently paved the way for his musical career. It was his way of paying tribute to Holly and the late rock star's influence on McCartney's music. Buddy Holly's sad death in an aircraft accident at the early age of 22 left Lubbock permanently scarred by the city's association with the beginning of the rock and roll icon's musical career. Holly had become a Lubbock cultural icon, and although McCartney had played in innumerable locations throughout the globe, playing in Lubbock held particular meaning. Going back to rock and roll's origins, honoring Holly's music, and paying tribute to the guy who had an impact on McCartney's creative universe were all part of the journey. For McCartney and the Lubbock residents, the United Supermarkets Arena concert was an unforgettable, once-in-a-lifetime experience. Famously generous with his fans, McCartney recognized the significance of the occasion, spoke at length about how Holly had influenced his music, and then performed a medley of Beatles songs and solo work. This concert provided an outlet for many in the crowd, allowing them to honor the past while reliving the present. McCartney's performance was an homage to Buddy Holly, who helped establish the rock and roll genre as much as it was an opportunity to showcase his own accomplishments. Before the performance, McCartney opened up about his early exposure to Buddy Holly's music, recalling how, as a youngster, he had been enchanted by the infectious energy and simple beauty of Holly's radio songs. If there was anyone McCartney ever came to appreciate, it was Buddy Holly. He proved that you could be anything you wanted to be, not just another stereotypical crooner. You could be yourself, you could rock, you could roll, and it was okay. This recognition showed that McCartney still admired Holly and highlighted how much her uniqueness and authenticity had touched McCartney, who would go on to create innovative music that challenged norms. There was more than just a mutual appreciation of music between McCartney and Holly. McCartney looked up to Holly and tried to model his own career after his sincerity and dedication to his trade. Both his music and his public demeanor were revolutionary for his time. Unlike other rock and roll greats, Holly rejected the formulaic and overproduced sound of his contemporaries. McCartney's embracing of the same individualism was a crucial component to the success of the Beatles. McCartney paid homage to Buddy Holly in Lubbock as a means of recognizing that the Beatles may not have existed in their current form had he not pioneered a new approach to music. More than merely a memorial, McCartney's Lubbock performance was a representation of the profound emotional connection he had with Holly and his music. Performing in Holly's hometown had a profound spiritual and emotional impact on McCartney. To stand where Holly's musical legacy had began, and to celebrate his life and music with a community that had never stopped celebrating, was a once-in-a-lifetime chance. In honor of the man who had established the blueprint for modern rock and roll, McCartney's performance evolved into more than just a concert. Lubbock is the place where Buddy Holly came from, and when I stepped on that stage, I felt like I was standing on the shoulders of a giant. McCartney's remarks resounded with the audience, who grasped the gravity of the occasion as he reflected on the event's prominence after the performance. Playing on the stage where Holly had previously resided and worked was a means for McCartney to complete the circle, from being a little child in Liverpool who was inspired by Holly's songs to becoming a musical icon in his own right. In interviews given before the show, McCartney discussed the lasting impact that Buddy Holly's music had on him. The impact of Holly continued to shape McCartney's career even after he became famous and established his place in rock culture lore. By paying respect to Holly, McCartney was doing more than honoring a musical legend. He was also recognizing the impact Holly had on his own life's journey, which, like Holly's, would inspire generations of musicians. Not only was McCartney paying tribute to a fallen hero during the Lubbock concert, but he was also demonstrating to the world that Buddy Holly's legacy was vibrant and influential in today's music industry. Had McCartney paid respect to Buddy Holly in Lubbock the sole time he had done so throughout the years? In what other unexpected ways has McCartney continued to honor Holly via his music? During a special Radio 2 documentary in 2024, Paul McCartney reflected on the profound impact of Buddy Holly on his music and the innovative sound of the Beatles. More than simply the songs, McCartney found inspiration in Holly's unique approach to music and her flexibility as an artist. She was like an all-inclusive one-man band, according to McCartney. McCartney's respect for Holly extended well beyond his musical tastes. It pertained to Holly's revolutionary impact on the artist's place in popular society. One of the pioneers of rock and roll, Holly wrote and recorded his own songs in groundbreaking ways, all while testing the limits of what was then possible with technology. For McCartney, Holly was more than simply a lyricist. She was a trailblazer who changed the face of rock and roll. Both McCartney and John Lennon really appreciated Holly's talent for combining melody, harmony, and profound words, as McCartney admitted in the documentary. Beyond that, though, McCartney exposed a more subtle aspect of Holly's impact: his instrumentation of the studio. The Beatles' innovative studio work would come to be associated with overdubbing, a technique that Holly helped pioneer. Holly's albums have an unprecedentedly inventive feel because to his utilization of several tracks and sound layering. McCartney said that the Fab Four's usage of the recording studio for inspiration was heavily influenced by this method. Holly's fearless exploration of sound had a direct impact on the innovative studio techniques and musical structures used by the Beatles in their subsequent albums, such as Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band and Revolver. Holly impacted McCartney in many ways, not just his music but also his career and public image, as he stressed in the interview. Unlike other rock stars of his day, Holly was unique. Holly was more appealing than many of his predecessors because he was approachable and didn't rely on ostentatious performances or old-fashioned theatrics. He was more than simply a performer. He was an artist whose music resonated with listeners because it was an honest reflection of his inner life. This sincerity was appreciated and acknowledged by McCartney and the rest of the Fab Four. Like Holly before them, the Beatles came to understand as they ascended to stardom that their success was due more to tapping into something raw and authentic in their songs than to innate musical talent. The fact that Buddy Holly was pioneering the use of structures and sounds that would later be foundational to the development of rock and roll was something that McCartney respectfully brought up as well. Instead of merely following fashion, Holly was a trend-setter. By fusing rockabilly, pop, and R&B in thrilling new ways, his compositions were ahead of their time. Consideration of this by McCartney prompted him to disclose the extent to which Holly's courageous musical style impacted him. It served as a gentle reminder that McCartney, similar to Holly, was not hesitant to challenge convention. Like Holly in the 1950s, McCartney's work with the Beatles would keep challenging the established quo of popular music. During the conversation, McCartney also discussed how rock and roll was a very young and developing musical style when he was starting out. Holly was one of the few musical icons who could boast an impressive blend of innovativeness, financial success, and impact. If you ask McCartney, Buddy Holly was one of those guys who changed the game for all of us. He could play just about any instrument. He did more than simply sing. He also composed, produced, and performed the music. In the studio, he was his own boss. McCartney looked up to Holly for reasons more than just the music. His respect for Holly extended to the way he handled his craft, a philosophy that McCartney would eventually embrace in his solo work and beyond. The significance of Holly's songs to McCartney also stemmed from the depth of feeling they evoked. The profundity in Holly's music allowed it to connect with listeners of all ages. despite the fact that it was frequently energetic and lively. Songs like True Love Ways had a subtle beauty, McCartney said, and the lyrics dealt with love and loss, themes that McCartney would later investigate in his own work. He elaborated on how, to him, these songs spoke to something really human, rather than merely being a component of the popular culture of the period. McCartney would continue to model his own career after Holly's because of her talent for expressing nuanced feelings via simple song lyrics. McCartney's approach to songwriting throughout his career is particularly influenced by Holly. Although McCartney and Lennon were famous for writing some of the best rock and roll songs of all time, it was McCartney's respect for Holly's compositions that inspired him to develop his own style. Holly's talent for crafting simple yet powerful hooks was something McCartney carried over into his own work, a lesson that McCartney would carry with him as he composed songs for the Beatles. And his solo career was the value of melody and lyrics, as demonstrated in Holly's music, which wasn't only about dazzling guitar riffs or boisterous performances. One of the most important ways McCartney has continued Buddy Holly's legacy is by always celebrating Holly's songs. There has always been a strong connection between Holly's music and McCartney, from the early Beatles versions of Holly's songs to his 1971 acquisition of Holly's song library. In addition to demonstrating his respect for Holly as an artist, McCartney's desire to ensure that rock and roll's legacy lives on through his attempts to archive Holly's songs. The purchase of Holly's song collection by McCartney was a watershed event in the preservation of rock's heritage, guaranteeing that the music that shaped popular music would be heard by years to come. The connection between McCartney and Buddy Holly's music goes beyond mere adoration. It is a tale of a lasting musical legacy that inspires generations to come. Like Holly's music did for McCartney in the 60s, McCartney has utilized his own music to pass the torch on, making sure that Buddy Holly's impact on rock and roll is remembered, appreciated, and cherished by every new generation of listeners and artists. To what extent, though, did Buddy Holly's impact go beyond that of Paul McCartney? Would rock and roll have been a different story if he hadn't passed away at such a young age? Buddy Holly's enduring influence through McCartney's artwork. Even after the 1960s, Paul McCartney couldn't shake Buddy Holly's impact. Echoes of Holly's composition may be heard in McCartney's own songs, a testament to how Holly's legacy lives on in her music. McCartney built upon Holly's foundation of memorable and profoundly important music by adding catchy melodies and emotional depth. Whether he meant to or not, McCartney has kept Buddy Holly's spirit alive throughout his solo career. Some of Holly's most memorable songs, including Live and Let Die and Maybe I'm Amazed, have his signature innovative melodies. McCartney, similar to Holly, has never been afraid to try new things, whether it is in the studio or on stage. Similar to how Holly's fearlessness propelled him to pioneering status in the 1950s with tactics like overdubbing, it continues to be a cornerstone of McCartney's success. McCartney's performance approach clearly reveals Holly's influence. A genuine, unassuming kind of music has always been McCartney's, much like Holly's. In the same way that Holly brought modesty to his personal performances, McCartney has always put the music first, whether he's playing with the Beatles or on his own. A testament to Holly's energy is McCartney's lively and upbeat performances. Even on his slower, more contemplative songs like Yesterday and Blackbird, McCartney captures Holly's gift for writing music that is both simple and meaningful. McCartney was motivated to write songs that are deeply personal and yet accessible to a wide audience by Holly's skill in generating powerful emotions via spare arrangements. Their friendship has been strengthened by McCartney's unwavering support of Holly's legacy, which included performing in a memorial concert in her honor in 2021. This is more than simply a tribute to Holly. It's an opportunity for McCartney to acknowledge the influence Holly had on his own creative development. To this day, Holly's music will endure for years to come because to McCartney's ongoing touring and recording, which is heavily influenced by Holly. Paul McCartney's unending homage to Buddy Holly reveals the profound impact of the pioneer of rock and roll on McCartney's work. Inspiring generations to come, McCartney has done it again and again by conserving Holly's catalog and reusing her early covers. Do you agree that Buddy Holly had an impact on Paul McCartney's music? Let us know what you think in the comments. And if you like this story about music's past, please subscribe for more.